All right then. All right then. So today we're going to be talking about the next layer of the pyramid. So just as a little recap, we have done the Aya Healing Pyramid, which we give like an overview of the Aya Healing Pyramid and go through each lesson, each layer of the pyramid in you know uh, briefly. And then we went on to the material body layer, so the bottom layer of the pyramid, the material physical body. That's what that was lesson two. And then the next lesson was the bioenergy layer, and the bioenergy layer was last month. Yes, so the bioenergy layer was the lesson last month, and we are going up the pyramid. So let me just remind you of the layers of the pyramid. We'll have another little reminder in a minute, but we've got the material body layer at the base of the pyramid. We've got the bioenergy layer, that's the magnetic field systems of the human body. Then we've got the emotional layer, then we've got the psychological layer, and we've got the spiritual layer on top of the pyramid. So today we are doing the emotional layer of the Aya self-healing pyramid, or pyramid of self-healing. Right, and well, I will crack on then. So let me share my screen. So I don't think there's any new people here today, so I can race through some of these little reminders that we have, of course. The logo, the blue butterfly is the logo at Aya. And the electric blue is the frequency of unconditional love. And the butterfly is a symbol of transformation, of course. Going on a self-healing journey is a kind of a transformation. So let's go straight into some breath work. So we have learned all the three different types of breathing exercise already now in the first three lessons. We did the basic yogic breathing. We did the golden energy yogic breathing, and then last month we did the chakra breathing. So we're going to carry on doing those three exercises throughout the rest of the course. In fact, most of the time we'll focus on the golden energy yogic breathing and the chakra breathing, to be honest. But we'll revert back to the basic yogic breathing, if new people join, because the basic yogic breathing is the precursor to the golden energy yogic breathing. So let's do the golden energy yogic breathing for a while. So let me just remind you to get the technique right and the counting right. So it's on the in-breath, so not nice vertical spine on the in-breath. Belly comes out first, then chest comes out. And you feel right up to the top, then you hold for a little while, and then let it all out in a nice, long, slow, steady stream, all the way down to the bottom of the breath. And then you hold again at the bottom of the breath, and then repeat. That's the rhythm, of course, that's basic yogic breathing. The golden energy part is the visualization. So on the in-breath, you want to visualize golden energy pouring in from all directions and filling up your whole energy body with that nice, clean, fresh, golden energy. And then on the breath hold at the top of the breath, exploding out in all directions. That intensifies the energy that you're downloading into the energy body. And then as the air is coming out of your lungs, that golden energy stays in your energy body. You don't want to be, in your visualization, you don't want to be breathing out the golden energy. It has to stay there. And please do notice if it pours out and you can't stop it pouring out in your visualization, because that's interesting when that happens, and it means something about the chakras. But really, on the out breath, the lungs are getting emptier and emptier, but the golden energy is staying. And then you just repeat. All right, so let's do that for a little while. I'll let you know when to stop. 10 breaths or so. And eyes closed or open, it's completely up to you for this one. Little things I wanted to remind you about that breath work. If you do breath work regularly, it's quite often that you find that you can get these emotional flushes, little rushes of emotion sometimes. I did mention this a couple of times before, so it's just a reminder. But it's very common, and that can happen. But what's actually happening when that happens? Well, you are getting a tinge of the emotional energy which went into creating a particular blockage, a blockage in the energy body. Now, we talked about the energy body lots last month, didn't we? Because that was the bioenergy layer. So we talked about blocked chakras and blocked meridian system. There can be blockages all around the energy body, but those blockages are coming from emotional energy. And when we do breath work, especially the golden energy yogic breathing, we're actually removing blockages from our energy body. So quite often, if a blockage becomes removed, it breaks free, that emotional energy then becomes free in the energy body. And quite often, it will find a chakra and it will activate that emotion chakra and you'll feel that emotion. So quite often, that's why we get an emotional flush. But then the emotional energy then gets dispelled out of the energy body very quickly because you're doing that deep breathing. It's getting that energy flow moving, so you're expelling that energy immediately. But that's why it's a good sign if you get emotional flushes as you're doing breath work or throughout the day if you're doing breath work regularly. So today's lesson is actually about the emotional layer. So we're going to talk about emotional energy. Okay, any comments or question about breath work so far? So, quick reminder about the Aya Healing Pyramid. So the Aya Healing Pyramid is a three-dimensional structure. It is a pyramid, and it's got information on three sides. And this is just to show you that it's a three-dimensional structure. The actual sides are here. And you've got the blue side, the green side, and the yellow side. The blue side is the names of the layers, of course. The green side is the self-healing techniques that we apply to each one of those layers to keep each layer healthy. And then the yellow side is the goals or the results of self-healing. As you go through a self-healing journey, these are the things that you start to see. So each lesson is a mixture of these three sides. We always start the lesson with some information on the layer, explaining what that layer actually is. And then we go to side 2 and we explain the self-healing techniques used for that layer. And then we always just finish on side 3 just to remind everybody what the results are supposed to be. So today we're going to talk about the emotional layer. So the emotional layer is, as it sounds, of course, everything to do with our emotions. But there's a lot to pick apart with our emotions. There's a lot going on in our emotional cycle. And there's a fuel to our emotional cycle, which everybody needs to know about. And people have been talking about it for thousands of years, but still not quite got the hang of it, or it's certainly not part of mainstream yet. I'll explain about that later. But first, let's actually talk about the emotional cycle itself. So the emotional cycle, in its most basic form, can be thought of with two components: thoughts and emotions. You've probably noticed already in your life that when you feel an emotion, and let's focus on the negative emotions for a minute, because this is what we're trying to heal quite often in self-healing. When you feel a negative emotion, it is preceded by thoughts, usually. There is a thought pattern in the mind that kicks off. That then kicks off an emotion that you feel somewhere in the body, a physical feeling. It's a negative feeling in the body somewhere, like a fizzing of some kind in the body. And then that emotion in the body, very unpleasant, of course, but then that kicks off more of the thinking. And then the thinking kicks off more of the emotion. We go round and round and round in a cycle. And that's in its most basic form is the emotional cycle. So anxiety, for example, is worrying. The thinking part is worrying about something. You start worrying, and then that kicks off the emotion of fear in the body somewhere, and then that kicks off more of the worrying thoughts, and we go round and round. Now, there's a lot more going on to it than just those 2 points, of course. So let's expand on that emotional cycle. So this diagram gives you a snapshot of the emotional cycle, including certain aspects of our energy anatomy. Now, we talked about the bioenergy layer last month, so you'll know what I'm talking about now when we're talking about emotion chakras, or emotional energy is part of the bioenergy layer, but it's involved in the emotional cycle. So on this diagram, let's just start at the top left-hand corner with a trigger. usually there is a trigger, and normally it's outside us. Now in this diagram, think of the blue square in the middle as inside your anatomy, inside your body, and everything outside is outside the body. So the trigger is outside of the body, usually. It can come just from conditioned patterns of thought, but that usually originated from a trigger outside. So something in your life is triggering you, triggering your mind to think about it. Something in our social life, something in our workplace, something in our family life, whatever. It's outside of us. It's in the external conditions of our life. And that triggers thinking patterns in the mind. Now, those thinking patterns then trigger or activate the production of emotional energy. Now, emotional energy, I'm going to talk about more in a second. But it's a type of magnetic field. It's a type of subtle energy. It's a type of chi or prana, whatever we want to call this type of energy, which has been known about for a long time. It's given lots of different names. But in the future, it's going to be understood in science that it's an actual type of magnetic field with a programming. So thinking produces emotional energy, and then the emotional energy circulates around our energy body and finds a particular emotion chakra. Now there's lots of chakras around the body, but there are 5 that regulate our emotions. And that is from root to throat. Root, chakra, sacral, solar plexus, heart, throat. Those are the 5 emotion regulating chakras. And these are the only ones that get blocked up with emotional energy. So that emotional energy goes around and activates one of the chakras, let's say the heart chakra. The heart chakra then activates the emotional response in the material body. And that's what we call the emotion. That's that negative physical feeling you can feel in the body. And then that feeling kicks off more of the thinking. And we go round and round. Now there is a little label in the middle saying fuel. I'm not going to talk about that now. I'm going to talk about that later in the lesson. But there is something that actually fuels this cycle. And understanding that is the key. It's the key to the self-healing journey. It's the key to spiritual evolution, in fact. But let's look at this cycle in a bit more detail and going through each part one by one. So I don't really need to tell you what emotions are, of course, but for the record, here are some emotions. And notice that you can pretty much categorize them as positive or negative. And in self-healing, we're trying to increase the positive and we're trying to decrease the negative. That's the point of well-being, isn't it? We all want to feel well. We all want to feel better. It's about our being feeling well. So we're trying to increase the positive, decrease the negative. Now, the emotions are generated in the material body through material body systems, such as the limbic system in the brain. In the center of the brain, there is a limbic system, and then the system of glands in the body called the endocrine system is also involved in our moods. Now, I'm just mentioning that just to bring that in to the emotional cycle, because of course it's all involved, and science knows a lot about quite a bit about the material body and the limbic system and the endocrine system. There's a lot it doesn't yet know, of course, about how it regulates or how it's part of our emotional cycle. And of course, let me just remind everyone that our bioenergy layer, the energy anatomy, is not yet part of mainstream science. I want to keep saying that just to make it absolutely clear. But we think it will be in the future. So let's take our negative emotions. And the first thing that we need to understand in self-healing is where they are. And I'm talking about the conscious experience of them here, not the biology behind it, not the limbic system and the endocrine system. I'm talking now conscious experience. Where are we feeling these things consciously? And if you've ever actually gone and tried to look for your emotions, then you'll know what I'm talking about here. But many people do not do this. It's very common for people to run away from their negative emotions. And running away from their negative emotions means not looking at them, not wanting to feel them. So when you go and find your negative emotions, it is an opposite, it's such a negative feeling. You don't want to go and make it closer to you, but going to find them is actually bringing that emotion closer to you. You've got to go and find it. And we'll talk more about why later on. But when you do find where your emotions are, what you'll find is that they are generally felt in this strip along the front of your body. Next time you feel something negative, an emotion, go and find it. Prove this for yourself. Anxiety, for example, is usually I've never had any other case or anybody that said anything otherwise than either feeling it in the stomach area or the heart area. Anger, for example, is usually felt sort of in the face area. It's a very sort of heady emotion, isn't it? People get flushed in the face. Now, quite often it's a bit difficult to find some of these emotions in the moment, because you've got to become aware in the moment that you're having an emotional reaction. And that is an achievement in itself, because quite often people lose the plot when they're having an emotional reaction, especially with things like anger. You can completely lose it for a little while and then only know afterwards that you've had an emotional reaction. So finding these emotions is you have to start with at least having awareness of the emotion and knowing that you have an emotional reaction. Now, have you ever tried to find your positive emotions? These are a bit trickier, and most people don't try this because why would you? It's not something you really want to get rid of or anything, but it's just an interesting exercise to go and see if you can actually find where your positive emotions are. And what you'll find is that they're generally higher up. Love is probably the easiest. When you feel love, it's not surprisingly, it's heart-centered. You feel it in this area. But next time you feel happy, next time you're laughing, next time you're feeling joy, try and find where that is. You'll find it somewhere higher up, and sometimes even you can even feel it slightly outside of yourself. It's very much thinner feeling. It's a much lighter feeling than the negative emotions, which tend to be very thick and coarse. So that's a good place to start with self-healing, is to go and find your emotions. And that becomes very important later on in this lesson when we talk about the self-healing exercises for this layer. So let's talk about emotion chakras. Now here I want to introduce you to the concept of energy psychology. Now, it's been known about for a long, long time that there are chakras in the body and that chakras have specific roles. Now, if we're going to define a chakra, like we did this last month, but if we're going to define a chakra, we'll call it an energy pump, because they all pump energy around the energy body. But many of them have very specialized roles. And there's 5 emotion chakras from root to throat. Now, each one of these regulates a certain set of characteristics in the personality. This is called energy psychology. And energy psychology is a growing field in healing and maybe spirituality, whatever you want to call it. It's a growing field in well-being and healing circle. So energy psychology refers to the energy, the link between the energy body and the psychology of the personality. Or you could say the bioenergy layer and the psychological layer, couldn't you, as well? So these are the 5 emotion chakras, and these are the characteristics that they regulate. So the throat chakra, communication of self-expression. So communication and self-expression. So any characteristics in the personality that has anything to do with that will be regulated by the throat chakra. Extroversion or introversion, for example, that has to do with communication of self-expression. The heart chakra, attachment to loving relationships. So anybody in your life that you have a loving relationship with, or that you're supposed to have a loving relationship with, is regulated by the heart chakra. Solar plexus chakra is identification with beliefs. Now, our belief systems. Now, quite often people think of a belief system. All right then, so back to energy psychology. So we were talking about the solar plexus chakra and identification with beliefs. So quite often when we think of our belief system, we think about what we believe about the world around us, external to us, right? Well, of course, that is part of our belief system. But just as we have just as many beliefs about ourselves. Now, what we believe about the world around us tends to get wrapped into our identity, but what we believe about ourselves is almost more important, because that's what forms the identity quite often, our self-beliefs. So if we are identified with these beliefs, well, most people are, of course, because that's what causes the false self, the egoic identity, the little self, the psychological self. That's why the ego is finalized or centered in the solar plexus chakra. Sometimes it's called the inner child chakra. You might have heard of that phrase, the inner child chakra. And that's only because a lot of the personality or the identity of that person is formed while you are a child. It doesn't stop forming. It still carries on changing throughout the course of your life, but that base of identity tends to get solidified as a child. So sometimes it's called the inner child chakra. So any characteristics to do with identification with beliefs gets regulated by the solar plexus chakra. And an example here could be self-doubt or something like that anyway. So it's not always external beliefs. It's internal beliefs as well. Okay, so the next one is the sacral chakra. The sacral chakra is all about reproduction and parental care. So anything to do with our children, basic. And then the root chakra is safety, security, and survival. Anything to keep us alive, secure, and safe. So it's the first three chakras really that go into the false self: the root chakra, the sacral, and the solar plexus. That's where the identity is really built and finalized at the solar plexus. Okay, any questions so far? So these emotion regulating chakras, they get activated by emotional energy, which is coming from our thought patterns in the mind. The thought patterns create the emotional energy, and then the emotional energy navigates to a particular chakra that it's coded for, because that emotional energy has a particular coding or programming on it that is designed to activate one of these chakras. And it comes from the personality characteristic in the mind, of course, in the psychology. So if somebody has an extreme fear of death, that's a characteristic in the personality, isn't it? That characteristic is regulated by the root chakra because it's safety, security, and survival. So when somebody starts constantly worrying about that, then emotional energy to do with that is produced, and then it goes and finds the root chakra, activates the root chakra, and it's the root chakra which then activates the fear response in the body. And on the left, I've still put the limbic system and endocrine system in there to show that any of those chakras have access to the whole of the emotional system in the material body. So any of those emotion chakras can activate any of the emotions. So let's talk about emotional energy a little bit. Now we'll be coming back to energy psychology a lot in the next lesson, by the way, because the next lesson is the psychological layer, and we'll talk about energies. So let's talk about emotional energy a little bit. So here's a very simple drawing of the energy body with the 5 emotion chakras. Now, emotional energy, most people, I think, today would have some sort of idea of what we're talking about already when we talk about emotional energy, because we've got these things in our language already. You know, the atmosphere in the room was electric, or I can feel that the negative energy or the positive energy coming from that person, or you've got really positive energy, you've got really negative. Well, you wouldn't say that to somebody, you've got negative energy, but you know what I mean. You would feel it. People do feel these things, and it exists in our language already. You know, if you go into a stadium, whether it's sports or music or something like that, you know, quite often you feel the electric, or it feels electric in the air, and you can actually feel it around you, can't? So, you know, when this comes out in mainstream science and it's detected, it's not going to be much of a stretch for people to actually accept it, because they kind of knew it all along. People use it. People talk about it all the time without realizing that it is an actual energy. Now, when this thinking in the emotional cycle, when this thinking kicks off emotional energy and it goes around the energy body, finds that particular chakra, activates it. It's done its job then. But actually, the problem is, what can happen is that the emotion carries on and then too much of it is produced. And then it fills up the energy body and it even comes out of the energy body. Now, you guys have most of you have probably felt this as well at some point, where it starts coming out of people. It comes out in clouds sometimes. And this stuff, and we're talking about negative emotions here, positive emotional energy is not a problem. It's more wispy, it disappears and is positive anyway. But negative emotional energy is really thick and viscous, and you can feel, if you're energy sensitive, and most people are to some degree, it's a human sense, when you feel it, it's really sticky and viscous and thick. It can really stick to you. When you're really energy sensitive, it can become a problem sometimes. You can feel it off other people, and this stuff gets stuck everywhere. It gets ingrained into things as well. It can hang around for quite a long time. You can be walking down the path and you can go through a cloud of this stuff and you're like, oh, that's something really horrible. I feel really horrible suddenly. And then if you ingest it, it can actually activate your own emotional cycle and you start feeling emotions. But it's not come from you. It's come from somewhere else. Somebody that was there a few hours ago or whatever. Now, if somebody is always producing negative emotions, then this is what happens. All of their chakras can be dishing out this stuff, and then the chakras get blocked up. This is what causes blockages in the emotion chakras. And when you look at somebody, when you can see chakras and emotional energy, because you can train yourself to, and some people see them naturally sometimes, you do see the chakra as blocked, and you do see it as a dark color, and the blacker it is, the more blocked it is. Now, one thing that really blocks up chakras like nothing else is the concept of repression. So a chakra is a bit like a grenade, and when a grenade explodes, what do grenades do? They explode, don't they? And that's what a chakra does. When a chakra gets a blockage, it tends to explode. Now, we've all known somebody, and you may have experienced it yourself as well, that stays calm for ages and ages and ages, but something is building up, and then some trigger comes along, and then bang, they explode with an emotional reaction. That's what a blocked chakra does. And it's not always an external emotional reaction. Quite often it's an internal emotional reaction. I remember I was like this, to be honest with you. When I would have an emotional reaction, quite often it would be internal, and that's more of an introverted type of reaction, isn't it? But chakras will explode, and whether it's internal or external. And they will lead people to make, or they can lead people to make very irrational decisions, basically. So repression is the way, or the biggest way that chakras get blocked up, basically. So repression is running away from our emotion. We all know that person who doesn't want to talk about their emotions, doesn't want to feel them, runs away from it, distracts them from ever having to feel it. That's repression, isn't it? And that actually jams the emotional energy into that chakra and blocks it up. So we want to do everything that we can to stop repressing emotions, to not keep hold of that blockage. And going back to breath work, when we feel a chakra becoming unblocked and we feel that emotional tinge to that emotion, that's clearing the chakra out and cleaning it, allowing it to function correctly so that you get no more of these explosions. So one more thing to say about the emotion chakras, and that is how they can actually transfer energy from person to person. Because I mentioned the cloud earlier, a cloud of negative emotion that comes out of somebody that hangs around. That's one way. So you get the cloud method, right, of emotional energy just hanging around in the collective mind, and you can walk through it and ingest it through your chakras. You also get transfer through what we call chakra cords. Now, this is a slightly different method. So emotional people who are sort of close to each other have emotional connections between them. So we make emotional connections with our family, with our friends, and an emotional connection is actually a chakra cord running between people. So here I'm using the example of a heart chakra. And this is a type of emotional communication that existed or has existed for a long time, because you can see it in animals and you can actually connect with animals as well. So it must have evolved millions of years ago as a way of sharing emotions. And this is what creates the concept of empaths, basically. So chakra cords are tubes that run through the collective mind and transfer emotional energy between people. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, let's do a bit of chakra breathing now. So we did golden energy yogic breathing at the start. Now let's do some chakra breathing, which we learnt last month. But let me remind you. So golden energy yogic breathing is changing out all the energy in your energy body for new, fresh, golden energy. And it also helps to remove blockages from pretty much everywhere in the energy body. Now, chakra breathing is slightly different. Chakra breathing is targeting particular chakras. And of course, we target the emotion chakras because that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to unblock negative energy blockages in the chakras. So that's why chakra breathing is so good, because you can actually target each blockage individually. Let me remind you about how to do chakra breathing. So let's start on the solar plexus this time. So last time I think we did using the example of the throat chakra and the heart chakra, I think we did. So let's go to the solar plexus. So we're using the same breathing rhythm as the golden energy yogic breathing, but we're doing a different visualization. So on the in-breath, you're going to be visualizing a colored energy going into that chakra. And you've got the colors up on the screen there. So the solar plexus, it's going to be yellow energy. So on the in-breath, you're visualizing yellow energy coming into your solar plexus chakra opening, because if you look at the chakra diagram, the chakra is actually on the spine. But then you've got these two funnels that come out, one to the front, one to the back. And these are the chakra openings. So you want to be visualizing that energy coming into the chakra opening. So on the in-breath, you're visualizing yellow energy coming in through the solar plexus and filling the whole body with that yellow energy. And then on the out-breath, very different now. This is very different to the golden energy one. On the out-breath, you want to be firing that golden energy back out of the solar plexus chakra opening. So you're breathing in and out of that chakra opening. So we do one on the front, we do a few breaths on the front, and then we go to the back aspect and we do the back as well, which tends to be a little bit more difficult than the front in terms of the visualizing of it. Now remember, if you respond well to visualizing, then use that method. But if you don't respond well to visualizing, go to the kinesthetic method. So try and feel the feelings in the skin, in the body, just around that opening, and use that as a focal point for your mind, and do the same thing. Form the intention that you're bringing that yellow energy in there through that focal point. So really, it doesn't actually matter if you see anything or not. It's the intention that actually matters for this exercise. But if you can, do both. Visualize and feel the energy moving in that area. And you might feel some little tingly sensations there when you do that. So we'll do a few on the front and then a few on the back, and then we'll stop before we carry on. Okay, go for it. Go straight to the back and try the back. Okay, before moving on to the sacral, any comments about that? Everyone managing to visualize it okay? Or feeling any sensations in the solar plexus? Yeah, it takes a bit of practice to do the back. and you got to find the sensations takes a lot longer sometimes, doesn't it? And I guess it's because we spend less time. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind, isn't it, at the back? I want to go back to the emotional cycle, the diagram of the emotional cycle, which we showed you at the start of this lesson. That's this one here. So let me just remind you again. There's a trigger outside of ourselves. Triggers thinking patterns in the mind, which then activates emotional energy. That emotional energy travels around our energy body and activates one of the emotion chakras. And then the emotion chakras triggers the emotional response in the material body, which then triggers more of the thinking. Now, what about this fuel in the center? Because if this cycle has a fuel to it, we can use the analogy of an engine. And it is a bit like an engine, so we call it an emotion engine. So let's look a little bit more closely about what this fuel actually is. And this fuel is what we call karma emotion. So the word karma is a very loaded word, isn't it? It's been known around, it's been used for thousands of years in many spiritual traditions and religions and philosophies. There are grains of truth, of course, to this karma word. But it's linked to emotion, that's what we're saying here. It's an actual fuel to the emotional cycle. So karma emotion is actually emotional memory. Now, it's been known for a long time, hundreds or even thousands of years in the yoga philosophies. It's been known that karma means memory. Karma is a form of memory. In the same way that we have memory systems in the brain for this incarnation, we also have memory systems for lots of incarnations. And yes, we're talking about reincarnation here. So karma emotion is a transport system for emotional memory over many incarnations. Now I want to dispel some myths immediately. Whenever we bring the word karma into things, there are some myths that are involved which we want to stay away from. Whenever most people use the word karma, they may come up with things like, well, karma is what goes around comes around, or if I'm bad things will happen to me, or it's some sort of cosmic judgment or cosmic punishment. Quite often, people are punished for doing bad things, that type of thing. So we want to stay away from all these type of myths. It's not about judgment and it's not about punishment. It's literally about memory. It's about emotional memory. So the easiest one to bring up as an example is anxiety or fear. This is what we call a basic karma. But arachnophobia is a good example here, the fear of spiders. If somebody has a strong fear of spiders, or they have an event in their life, or at some point in one incarnation there's an event with a spider and it creates a fear, then that memory of that fear is held in the energy body, in the outside layers of the energy body as karma emotion. And then that is future fuel down the line in future incarnations. That karma emotion will burn as a fuel and produce that fear of spiders. So it's a way of retaining emotional memory over many incarnations. It's actually a survival tactic for animal species. This is where we think it evolved millions of years ago in early animals. And this is going to be part of one of our research projects, which I'll mention a bit later on in this lesson. So that's what karma emotion is. It's emotional memory. And it's a bit like carrying around a big bag of emotions. And we kind of intuitively know that's what we're doing, isn't it? That's why we call it baggage. We've all got this baggage that we carry around as humans, and it's like a heavy load on our backs, and it's like walking through heavy sand, and it's slowing us down constantly. That's what it is to be human, you could say. That's the human condition. And it's all made of these different negative emotions. A big bag of negative emotions that people are carrying around with them. So the idea of self-healing is to lighten the load, is to lighten the baggage. And in some cases, you can literally put the baggage down, put the bags down and carry on without all that weight that you're carrying around with you. And of course, those emotions that we've just named, that's negative emotions. That's negative karma emotion, negative emotional memory. And the idea of self-healing is to increase positive karma emotion and decrease negative karma emotion. So in the end, that feels like it's pulling you along. Positive karma emotion. So that's the idea of self-healing. But how do we do that? How do we reduce the amount of negative karma emotion that we're producing and increase the positive? So to do this, we've got to understand what we can now call the karma emotion engine. Now, a lot of this has been known about for thousands of years. And what we're doing here is we're piecing it together and presenting it in a slightly biological way. And then we're even going to put this into a research project that we're starting soon. So how does the karma emotion engine work? Because that is essential if we're going to have any control over the fuel to our emotions. So understanding the karma emotion engine, essential to having any level of control over our emotional memory and therefore what emotions that we're feeling in the present moment and how much we're producing for the future. So in terms of self-healing, this is what we need to know. This is the basics of what everybody needs to know. Thinking creates new karma. Now, in many spiritual philosophies, you may already know that karma has been linked to action. Our actions create karma, is what is quite often said. But actually, think about it. What precedes all our actions? Thoughts, of course. There has to be thought in the mind for any action to happen. So what we're thinking, what we're suggesting here is that karma, the production of karma emotion, is linked to our thinking patterns. That's the first thing. And then this karma is produced, this emotional memory transport system, and that's held in the outside layers of the energy body. And when you can see energy bodies, you can actually see this karma. It looks like a mosaic of color in the energy body. Many people do see it as part of the bioenergy layer. You can actually, interestingly enough, you can actually map somebody's psyche by looking at their energy body, because all the personality characteristics are laid bare on the surface of the energy body because of karma emotion. Karma emotion is the basis to the personality, really. It's the emotional memory of that person. So that karma is produced, and then we can say that the fuel tank is the energy body, basically. Now, when we feel an emotion, that's old karma burning. So that's the main body of the emotion engine there, those cogs turning in there. That's the emotion which is actually, or the karma emotion which is burning or being processed, and we feel it as an emotion. And when we feel that emotion, it then triggers more of the thinking, which is why the cogs are going back up to the mind, the thinking bit of the mind. So really, this is just an interesting way of reframing the emotional cycle. But it's adding in the karma aspect, the fuel. So very important, thinking creates new karma for the future fuel, and feeling an emotion is burning old karma. So that's very important, because the self-healing technique that we're going to talk about in a bit is based on this concept. But we'll get to that. Now, a quick note about reincarnation, because we've mentioned reincarnation in this lesson, and we haven't mentioned it before, really, have we, too much in this course. This course isn't really about reincarnation. It's about self-healing. And, you know, self-healing can be applied to any person, whatever their particular beliefs are. But we've mentioned reincarnation, so we need to explain what we mean exactly. And this is going to be also the subject of a research project of ours. Biological reincarnation is what we're calling it. We're saying that reincarnation evolved millions of years ago as part of our biology. Biological reincarnation, we are saying that reincarnation evolved as part of our biology, as part of our anatomy. And animals reincarnate, humans reincarnate. And souls go on a journey of spiritual evolution. And the end game is self-realization, which we can talk about another time. It's not really part of this course. But here's a little depiction of reincarnation. And like I said, this is going to be part of one of our research projects, because we want to, anything that we're teaching about, we need to show evidence for. There's no point in us sitting here saying, this is how it works, if we haven't got any evidence. We live in an evidence-based world now, don't we? Everybody needs evidence, and rightly so, because everybody's saying all sorts of different things. So we need to back this up with evidence. That's why we've got a research department starting a set of projects. We're actually starting this year, and there's going to be a whole set of projects, and reincarnation and karma is going to be part of those research projects. All to do with healthcare, of course, healing. So in this diagram here, you could imagine the yellow and the orange little thing as the material body and the lower mind. That is one incarnation. The material physical body, and the lower mind is an energy framework which overlays the material body. I don't want to go too far into anatomy at this point, but that's one incarnation. And then you could say that this bit here that is looping round and round and round, that's memory. That is memory from each incarnation going into a new incarnation. Now, that's how it probably started originally in our evolution. Just emotional memory, managing to jump into new incarnations or new generations without needing reproduction. But now, of course, it's a massively evolved process, very complex process now. And that memory is now what we can call the soul, or the higher mind plus the energy body. That's the soul. So really that is the human system, both of them together, the soul plus the incarnation. And of course, I want to repeat, we need evidence. We need to show people evidence for this. Otherwise, there's no point in us preaching about it. And that's what our research projects are all about. And if you're interested in that, you can talk to us separately about that. I'm not going to go into it in this course much because we haven't really got time. Okay, so let's talk about side 2 now. We've talked about side 1 of the pyramid, the emotional layer. Now let's talk about side 2, the self-healing techniques that we apply to this layer. And here we're broadly calling it karma emotion work. And there's 2 exercises that we want to teach as part of this layer. Probably the 2 most important to teach people in a general way. Now there are other exercises as part of this layer that we can learn in other courses, but as part of this self-healing course, there's 2. Emotional meditation and karma yoga. Probably the 2 most important to teach people. So let's first start with karma yoga. That's the easiest to explain, really. And karma yoga, of course, is a type of yoga, and it's been known about for thousands of years. It's part of ancient yoga philosophy. Karma yoga is the yoga of selfless action, helping others with no personal benefit. That's what we're talking about here. And this actually burns karma away. Now, what are the ways of burning karma? The most common way is just the normal, natural way of feeling emotions. And what's another word for that? Suffering. If we're talking about negative emotions, suffering is one way that we burn karma. And that's the way most people are doing it. And it's just natural. That's part of spiritual evolution. That's part of life, of course. But there are ways to burn it away without feeling that negative emotion. And selfless action does that. Now, we're not sure exactly the mechanisms involved, but there's something in the mind and the energy body which almost opens the karma reservoirs like a tap and allows it to escape without actually feeling the negative emotion. And this is all part of biological evolution and the evolution of species, because it helps the society to function in a cohesive unit. That's how karma emotion actually evolved. So selfless action burns karma without you actually having to feel the emotion. So that's why it's so important to encourage everybody on the planet to help others. Now, the second one is probably the most important and one of the most important self-healing exercises that anybody can do, I have to say, through the journey of self-healing. And that is emotional meditation. So emotional meditation is taking a negative emotion and then cutting the emotional cycle in half and hopefully even turning it into a positive emotion. So how does this work? Well, this is the easiest and simplest technique, really. It takes a little bit of explaining to understand what's going on, but the actual technique is absolutely super easy. And you can teach it to people very easily without going into the complex emotional cycle that I'm about to explain, because it's such a simple technique. So first of all, you have to find your negative emotion. So don't forget, this is a practical exercise. That, we can't do this now, by the way, because you have to wait until you are feeling an emotion. So it's not something that we can practice together now. I just have to go through it, and then you can try it in your own time, whenever you feel an emotional reaction. Negative emotional reaction we're talking about. So the first thing is when you feel a negative emotion, find it. That's why it's so important to always analyze your emotions by finding them, trying to understand what they feel like, separating out the emotions and giving them a name, labeling them, knowing when you start feeling them, knowing what characteristic in the mind is triggering them. So you go and find your negative emotion. And like I said, usually all the way down here. And once you've found it, what happens is that you have to meditate on it. Now, we've done a few meditations now already. We haven't done the spiritual layer yet, where we really go into meditation in detail. But you've done enough meditations now in this course to know that there is a subject and an object when you meditate. You are the subject doing the meditating, and the object of meditation is what you're focused on in the mind or wherever you are focused on. Because meditating is focusing on one thing, isn't it? And training your mind to focus or concentrate. And in emotional meditation, you have to find that emotion and you focus on it as an object of meditation. That's why it is called meditation or emotional meditation. Now, this can be quite tricky, to be honest with you. For some people, this can be quite tricky. And the reason why it can be quite tricky is that it's painful. You have to, it's almost like facing your emotion. And, you know, sometimes when that heavy karma is burnt, if somebody has heavy karma, and we haven't talked about the weights of karma, that's another story. But if somebody has heavy karma, it means a lot of strong emotion. And the emotion that they're feeling when they're burning that heavy karma is very painful. And that can be very difficult to go and face that feeling. So for some people, this can be tricky because it's easier to run away from an emotion, isn't it, than actually go and find it and feel it. In emotional meditation, you've got to go and allow it. You've got to allow it to be by focusing on it. And it can take a bit of practice, first of all. But what's actually happening while you're meditating on that emotion? Well, what is meditation? Or what happens in meditation? You're focusing the mind, aren't you? You're focusing the mind on one thing. So what happens to the mind stream? It stops. It shuts down. You're cutting the mind stream. So basically, you're cutting the emotional cycle in half because the mind stream of thoughts is part of that cycle. That's one thing you're doing. You're cutting it in half. So generally speaking, the emotion will fizzle out. The second thing you're doing is you are cutting the karma production because you're stopping the mind stream, because it's the thoughts that's producing more karma emotion. So just by focusing on the emotion, you're cutting the emotional cycle in half and you're stopping the production of karma. And what you'll find is that very quickly, that emotional reaction just disintegrates. And it's fascinating when you do this for the first time, because it really does work. And if you do it for long enough, it vanishes completely. And quite often, the negative disappears and you start feeling more positive. And the last thing that it does is that if the chakras on the right that you can see, they're all nice and clear, aren't they? They're all nice and clean. That's because when you practice emotional meditation, you stop repression. Repression is the holding on to that negative emotional energy. That's what causes blockages. Not allowing yourself to feel the emotion. That's what repression is. Bottling up your emotions, not allowing yourself to feel it. That's what causes blockages. Well, in emotional meditation, you are allowing it. So you are actually cutting the emotional cycle in half. So you are stopping the emotion, but you're also allowing yourself to feel it. Whatever emotional energy is there, you are feeling it. You're allowing it to flow. Then that allows it to dissipate and go out of you. And it stops the repressive blockage in the chakra. Therefore, that's the third thing that emotional meditation does. It stops the process of repression as well. So how important is that for people to do or to learn to do constantly? One of the most important self-healing exercises there is, and one of the most simple, because really, at the end of the day, all you're doing is you're finding that feeling and you're not allowing your mind to stray away from it. You're focusing on it. It's very simple, but it does wonders. But like I was saying earlier, it can be tricky to become aware of one's emotions. Many people get locked or in an emotional reaction, and they're kind of unaware that it's taking them over. And then sometimes people will realize afterwards, like maybe two people have an argument and they rant at each other for a while, and they kind of lose the plot. And then it's only like a couple hours later, they'll go, "Oh, or I don't know if I meant what I said," or "Yeah, I'm sorry about that." The awareness of it comes in a bit later on. Now, the thing is with emotional meditation, it's a journey towards becoming aware in the moment, and then practicing emotional meditation as soon as that emotion comes on. And eventually, the gap between losing it and being aware gets smaller and smaller and smaller, until eventually you can actually become aware in the moment that you're having an emotional reaction, and that's when you can apply the meditation. And then eventually, actually, you'll start to become aware before the emotion hits. You'll start to feel, "Oh, I know I'm about to have an emotional reaction." Alarm bells, meditate. And then that's when it doesn't even arrive anymore. So eventually you can actually preempt the emotion completely. And all the way not repressing. So you're not repressing any emotion throughout that. Okay, and lastly, so that was karma yoga and emotional meditation. And lastly, side 3 of the pyramid. The results is positive karma emotions. Of course, that's the results of the emotional layer if we apply the self-healing techniques to the emotional layer. Now let me just remind you of the cascading effect of health and well-being down the pyramid. If we find the peace and unity in the spiritual layer, then that's going to have a massive impact on the psychological layer. It's going to start smoothing out the psychological layer. It's going to become more positive, less negative. And another way of saying that is more healthy values rather than unhealthy values. Don't worry, we'll talk about that more next month. But the impact of having healthy values or more positive psychological layer is going to be more positive karma emotions. Therefore, more positive emotions that you feel in the emotional layer rather than negative ones. And then the impact that has on the bioenergy layer is that you have more balanced emotion chakras. So a more regulated emotional cycle. Therefore, more positive emotions than negative, and the emotion chakras are clean and clear and free of blockages. And blockages cause inflated emotional reactions, don't they? They also cause ill health in the material body, which is why balanced emotion chakras have a massive impact on the material body layer, because long-standing blockages in the chakras create ill health and disease in the material body. So there we go. That's it for the emotional layer. Any questions or discussion points? So it like many things, it comes down to intention. intention process in the mind, which is a type of thought process. Forming the intention to do something is a thought process. And by the way, that's the same with energy healing. Energy healing is activated by the intention process in the mind, or some forms of energy healing. And cord cutting is also activated by an intention in the mind. And to do that, you can do whatever you want. And there are tons of different exercises that you can use. And some people, some systems of healing will get you to do visualizations. Like, for example, in pranic healing, they get you to visualize the cords, and they get you to visualize cutting them with a knife or a pair of scissors, something like that. The one we teach for people in the health and social care staff course is a door. So we visualize a door, and the door is our chakras, because every chakra actually does have a little door on it. And you just visualize a big door, and you visualize opening the door when you want them open and closing it when you want them shut. So these are just simple visualizations, but they are forming an intention in the mind. You can also do it through mantras. So you can repeat a certain phrase in your mind. So really, it doesn't matter. It's up to you how you do it, but it's all about forming the intention in the mind. And that's what actually does it. But the thing is, when you do it, quite often it's a constant process that you've got to go through. So you can do it once and it might cut the cord, but if that cord's been there for ages, it's going to jump back straight away. Or if you cut the cord in the morning and then you go and meet the person in the day, or the people in the day, and it jumps straight back again because you make those emotional connections immediately. So it's a daily thing that for many people that they should be doing. And also, if you start thinking about that person, the cord jumps back. And if that person starts thinking about you, the cord jumps back. So, all right then, shall we do a little meditation? And anybody who's can't stick around for that, as it is 12 o'clock, and no problem at all, but I will just crack on and do one.